Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 24th of November and today we're doing a frontline update focusing on parts of the front that we did not cover in yesterday's video. Before I do that, I need to issue a major correction, and that is regarding the area to the east of Avdiivka, specifically looking at the Donetsk filtration plant. This is an area the Ukrainians have fortified really since 2014, but especially from the periods of 2016 to 2019. And during the Avdiivka offensive, which started on October 10th, the Russians have been launching bombardment and also ground assaults in the direction of this specific defensive node, which now acts as sort of like operating point for the Ukrainian vanguard to prevent Russian incursions deeper into the Avdiivka area. And so in yesterday's video, I reported that the Russians were able to capture this area. That is not true. There's still no indication of the Russians being able to take it over. So for all we know, the Ukrainians are still here. There were reports of fighting going on around the filtration plant, but that's not the same thing as taking it over, of course. So the Russians are making an effort to attack along the no man's land in between the Ukrainian and Russian lines of control. But for now, this is the current front line. Now, looking at the Kherson front, we're going to focus on Krinky today. There are conflicting reports about what's been going on over the past 48 hours. There are reports, first of all, from the Russian side that elements of the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade located over here and the 144th Motor Rifle Brigade were able to accumulate a strike force in the area to the south of Krinky and push the Ukrainian Marines and other units that were operating in the forested areas located to the south of Krinky. So that would be in these areas over here where you did have a noted Ukrainian DRG presence and also Marines that were operating in these forested areas trying to reach the M14 highway, which is the highway running over here, in an effort to degrade Russian logistics. So there were attempted raids in that direction and there were clashes, and the Russians did send in reinforcements from some of their territorial defense units to hold the line over here to prevent any sort of further incursions by the Ukrainians. And so now this is what the Russians are claiming, that they were able to push back whatever Ukrainian forces are located in the area back into the residential parts of Krinky located over here. Now, looking at the Ukrainian side, their sources report that they were able to repel Russian assaults in those same wooded areas. And so they're claiming there was a Russian attempted counterattack in this direction with these arrows indicating the vector of attack, but they claim that they were able to repel those assaults. Meanwhile, looking at Krinky itself, I did make a minor adjustment to the map, and the change I made is to indicate the Russians have additional control in some of the houses in the western part of the village located around here. This is based off of a recent video posted by the Flying Skull drone units, and this is a Ukrainian drone unit operating on the southern bank of the Dnieper River, and they conducted strikes onto Russian forward positions, firing points in the residential areas in the western parts of Krinky, which again indicates the Russians do have a presence in that area and are trying to put pressure onto the Ukrainians that created the bridgehead in Krinky. The compilation video, which could be found here, also gives us an idea of Ukraine's drone capabilities in this region, which are numerous. In the compilation, you could see that there are many direct hits on the houses. I can't speak to the casualties, but you could see that once the FPVs hit the houses, the Russian forces are forced to regularly withdraw from those positions and take up positions in different houses. And so that's generally the situation on the western side. And then moving a bit to the south, there are also Ukrainian drone units that are also working in tandem with artillery to spot and target Russian equipment and reinforcements that are making their way to the Krinky front along the M14 highway. So here you have the M14 highway. In a lot of instances, you have the troops that are mounted on trucks or equipment that is being unloaded at several points along the M14 highway, and then they get moved into the forested area as they make their way to the fighting on the front line. And so the Ukrainians, they have their drone reconnaissance units that are looking out for these instances, and then they're giving the coordinates to the artillery. And so just one instance of that recently that occurred is a Ukrainians being able to shell a KAMAZ truck and Russian personnel that was stationed along the M14 highway, most likely making it towards the forested area for the aforementioned counterattacks. On the other hand, the Russians are continuing their heavy bombardment of the Ukrainian forces in the central part of Krinky. Just as one example, here you have a video of Russian artillery strikes on the Ukrainian firing points within the residential parts of Krinky. And then a bit to the north, you also had this video of Russian FABs that were hitting the Ukrainians, not just within Krinky, but also in the forested areas to the north. And these floodplains are extremely important because the Ukrainians, for the past couple of weeks, have been paving these different routes. And these are the sort of routes that they're basically using to send additional men across and conduct rotations. And so a lot of these are now being spotted by the Russians, and they're trying to target it in an effort to try to prevent an additional accumulation of Ukrainian forces on the bridgehead, and to also prevent any sort of attempt at expanding the bridgehead even further. Meanwhile, looking at the Orikhiv sector, specifically at the area north of Novoprokopivka, the Ukrainians, specifically from the 65th Mechanized Brigade, they are trying to gradually overrun the Russian defenses to the north of the village. And we actually have some video evidence to indicate a relatively minor advance. What we'll see is that the Ukrainian forces in this region, they are first concentrating and coordinating their attacks from this specific fortification. This is a fortification they took several months ago during the counteroffensive, and this is a trench system that was built by the Russians south of Verbotinia, and it's also located on a hill that overlooks some of the surrounding open fields. And so this is like a coordination point, and from there the Ukrainian infantry tries to disperse and advance along several different points to try to reach the Russian dugouts and trenches further south. And before the Ukrainians are even able to get past the trench system and go further south, you already had Russian forces targeting them. So for instance, over here in this video from a couple of days ago, you had the Beaver drone unit, their FPV, struck a Ukrainian grouping within the trench system. Now, despite that fact, the Ukrainian infantry were able to advance further south along two different tree lines, this one here and this one here. They set up positions within Russian constructed dugouts, but eventually they were spotted by the Russian drone reconnaissance, and they were targeted by the Beaver drone units in two different instances. Here you had one strike on the dugouts and then another one, and this would confirm the advance of the Ukrainian forces from the fortifications. So it's about 500, 400 meter advance. And the Russian forces, the Russian contingent located within Novoprokopivka, which includes some elements of the VDV, they sent reinforcements to the northern part of Novoprokopivka, and you could see that there is a geolocated video of the specifically the VDV elements sending a BMP-3 to the northern outskirts of the village in an effort to try to repel any sort of attempted Ukrainian attacks. And eventually this BMP is hit directly by artillery shelling from Ukraine's 65th Mechanized Brigade. And then at the same time, the 65th Brigade, they dropped these munitions from drones onto Russian fort positions that are located within basements. A lot of these basements, the houses have been destroyed, but you could still enter into the basement from an opening. And so those openings, they could be seen from above, and you could drop munitions into them. And so that's what was done by the 65th in this specific instance. And that also gives us an indication that there are still Russian troops located at the very northernmost points of Novoprokopivka, trying to hold the line to prevent a Ukrainian entrance directly into the village. And finally, looking at the Bakhmut front, most of the heavy fighting is occurring to the north of Kurdyumivka, where you do have Ukrainian attempts at reaching the northern outskirts of the village by advancing along the rail line and the parallel tree lines. So basically in this direction towards Kurdyumivka. Now, the unit that's really at the forefront of this right now is the 92nd Assault Brigade. And so some of the other units that were involved in taking Klishivka and Andriivka and fighting on this entire sector, they are still present in the front line, but they have a reduced role at the ground zero of the front line. And this is due to them just retreating forces for a very long time, and now they're being given that time to rest, and the 92nd is filling that void. So the Ukrainian forces took advantage of their previously established positions on the rail line located around here, for instance, and they advanced further south, taking over Russian positions that were built by them earlier throughout the course of the war, including trenches and dugouts, and making it their own fortifications. And so the Ukrainian advance amounted to 700, 800, 900 meters at most in this direction going southwards towards Kurdyumivka. And this is confirmed by videos released by the Russians showing their targeting of these Ukrainian forces once they were spotted. So here, for instance, you have Russian drones dropping munitions onto the Ukrainian infantry in a trench near the rail line. And then here you have the Russian Special Forces Detachment Grom. They dropped munitions onto a Ukrainian-controlled trench. So you do have numerous instances of the Russians spotting them and targeting this Ukrainian infantry, but nonetheless, they were able to make these their new forward positions. The Russians are also attacking more well-established Ukrainian positions, such as this one located over here, which has been under Ukrainian control for weeks, if not months, and where you have had some troops basically taking up positions and then being rotated out because it really is at ground zero. So in this specific instance, there was a Russian nighttime artillery fire onto Ukrainian dugouts, and the Ukrainian forces, they withdrew and tried retreating in the direction of their main contingent, perhaps around Andriivka or further west in this direction, and they were again targeted by the Russian artillery. And at the same time that the Russians were launching drone and artillery strikes onto the rail line, they were also accumulating several squads of infantry in the areas to the northeast of Zelenopilia. So within this red rectangle, that's where you had the accumulation of forces, just a couple dozen, so not that much in relative terms. It actually would be significant in relative terms in this region. And they were taking up positions in trenches that are very close to the front line. For instance, this one, which is extremely close to the rail line where Ukrainians have positions. And they were spotted by the 1st Assault Battalion of the 92nd Brigade. And subsequently, they dropped munitions onto those Russian infantrymen. And then looking a bit further south, you also had the 92nd Brigade launch the DPICM cluster munition artillery shells onto the Russian infantry squad. And this infantry squad was advancing along this road. This is a key road that's been utilized by the Russian squads in this region to reach the line of contact. And so it was spotted by the Ukrainians, and they broke up the squad that was trying to attack in the direction of the Ukrainian fortified positions that are marked over here in blue. And so that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.